Thank you so much, John, for such generous words. So it is a great honor for me to be chairing this panel titled Critical Health Comes to Concord. I will say a few words about the context of the conversation that is about to ensue. But first, I would like to thank the Thorough Alliance, its two presidents, John and Court, the Thorough Society AG Committee, and of course, Rebecca, for putting together, once again, this wonderful event. So in October 2025, Phyllis, Kate, and Ariel did me the immense honor of flying to Paris to present at a conference titled Critical Health, Feminist Perspectives on Health and Well-Being in the 19th Century United States. A conference that I co-organized with Johanna Pitetti-Heil, who's senior lecturer at the University of Cologne in Germany, and who I met here at the AG 2 years ago. A few months later, Kate did me the even greater honor of suggesting that we bring critical health to Concord, proposing a panel about the Paris conference for the AG. What you are about to hear are slightly condensed versions of the papers that Kate, Ariel, and Phyllis, who accepted Johanna's and my invitation to be keynote speaker last October, gave when they were in Paris. Their papers reflect the richness and depth of the transcendentalist angle that these three brilliant scholars brought to the discussion. They also exemplify the interdisciplinary nature of the conference, a two-day event during which panelists from all over the world, France, the UK, the US, Italy, Canada, explored the implications of health precarity, as well as very concrete forms of health resistance during the 19th century, examining a variety of media from a variety of perspectives: literature, historiography, dense studies, and of course, the history of medicine. Okay, so now it is my great pleasure to formally introduce our three speakers. Ariel Silver, who is Associate Professor of English and Humanities Division Chair at Southern Virginia University, where she's also the Deborah Sowell Honors Humanities Lecturer. She currently serves as president of the Nathaniel Hawthorne Society and is the author of The Book of Esther and the Typology of Female Transfiguration in American Literature. She is the recent recipient of the Allison Miller Fellowship at the Massachusetts Historical Society and currently holds an NERFC Fellowship for her book project, The Conversationalists. Her work has appeared in EJAS, RFEA, WAL, Leviathan, the Nathaniel Hawthorne Review, and the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, as well as in numerous edited collections, including Esther in America, The Forgotten Alcott, and Beyond Little Women. Phyllis Skoll focuses her work on women of the Transcendentalist movement. She has often drawn upon and even recovered their letters and diaries as both literary genres of their own and sources of insight into published writing. Among her publications, in addition to many articles, are Mary Moody Emerson and the Origins of Transcendentalism, A Family History, and along with co-editor Jana Arger-Singer, Toward a Female Genealogy of Transcendentalism. She has been an officer or board member of the Emerson and Thorough Societies, and as a former president continues supporting the Margaret Fuller Society, which feels like an understatement. Among her awards are the MLA's James Russell Lowell Prize. She was a finalist in 1999. The Society for the Study of American Women Writers Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018, and of course, the Thorough Society's Thorough Medal in 2024. She has a PhD from Harvard University and is now Professor Emerita of English Women's Studies and American Studies at Penn State Brandywine. Last but of course not least, Kate Culkin is a professor of history at Bronx Community College and on the faculty of the Biography and Memoir MA at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She is the author of Harriet Hosmer, A Cultural Biography, and Emerson's daughters, Ellen Tucker Emerson, Edith Emerson Forbes, and their family legacy. And she's going to give a great tour on Wednesday of the Emerson house. Anyway, that's all for me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ariel Silver, and we're really delighted to be able to bring a piece of this remarkable conference last fall in Paris to you. My address today is entitled Labor Pains, Economics, Medicine, and Motherhood for 19th Century American Women. Oh, perfect. Thank you. In Labor Pains, Emerson, Hawthorne, and Alcott, on work and the woman question, Carolyn Mabor connects transcendental ideals to female labor in the literary work of Louise May Alcott. The work of Alcott can be seen as a response to Emerson's theory of vocation, articulated in his essay on trades and professions, where he declares, "What is labor but the act of individual man going out to take possession of the world which the universal mind hath built? Finding in matter the impression of the same footsteps which it knows so well in morals, yes, and reading the same laws in a different text and character. Every trade and occupation of man, if nearly examined, proves to be, through all its processes, a study of nature." In works ranging from hospital sketches to Little Women to Work, Alcott suggests that women must also be free to possess nature, reading the moral laws through their own text and character. They too must have access to the knowledge, ethical education, sense of purpose, and self-development which work provides. Otherwise, both they and society will suffer from their stunted growth and stifled resources. The nature and meaning of work are not only to be understood in the context of women's rights, but are important responses and contributions to one of the significant philosophical conversations of the period. But implicit in the term labor pains is a much richer set of interrelated concerns that bring together female production and reproduction, the physical and mental needs of women, and the connection between economic, biological, and social dimensions of women and their laboring bodies. Exploring the meaning of labor pains requires a consideration of female pain as well as female labor. In writing Pain in 2022, Tomás Constantinesco also responds to Emerson, whose philosophy of compensation promises to convert pain into gain, even as he explores the limitations of that model through the ways that 19th century writers, including women writers, write about physical and mental dimensions of pain. In what Charles Sanders Peirce described as the age of pain, female authors suggest that pain is compensatory in its power to convert a force that can destroy language into something generative, a site of thought. Margaret Fuller suffered from headaches throughout much of her life and sought relief in bloodletting and other cures to little avail. Fuller pursued her own labor in the face of exquisite pain, enacting a theory of vocation that entailed an individual woman as well as man going out to take possession of the world which the universal mind hath built. Her philosophy of compensation was to make the suffering located in her brain productive. In this way, her headaches represent more than a malady to be endured. Instead, they indicate the site of her thought at the confluence of labor and pain. In her oeuvre, from autobiographical romance to her letters for the New York Herald Tribune, Fuller is counting the cost of work, searching for the meaning of suffering, considering the value of compensation, and yearning for freedom to find her temporal and spiritual vocation. Fuller's head also aches on behalf of her sex, and that pain is expressed in Woman in the 19th Century, published after the conclusion of her series of conversations. Providing a retort to Emerson and laying the groundwork for Alcott, Fuller suggests that vocation is the birthright of every being capable to receive it, the freedom, the religious, the intelligent freedom of the universe to use its means, to learn its secret as far as nature has enabled them, with God alone for their guide and their judge. She considers labor a birthright and insists that we would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path laid open to woman as freely as to man. We believe the divine energy would pervade nature and a ravishing harmony of the spheres would ensue. Emerson himself had felt that divine energy in Fuller, confessing at one point that being in her presence is like being set in a large place. You stretch your limbs and dilate to your utmost size, conjuring the pains that attend labor. For Fuller, the mother body evokes maternal citizenship, which she makes more explicit when she suggests that those who think the physical circumstances of woman would make a part in the affairs of national government unsuitable are by no means those who think it impossible for the negress to endure field work, even during pregnancy, or the seamstress to go through their killing labors. For Fuller, such a woman is perfectly suited to the affairs of state, commerce, artistry, invention, and discovery. The head also takes on a mythic dimension in the text, where Fuller represents Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, who sprang from her father's head. From the time she could speak and go alone, her father addressed her as a living mind. Among the few verses he ever wrote was a copy addressed to this child, when the first locks were cut from her head, and the reverence expressed on this occasion for that cherished head. It was to him the temple of immortal intellect. Fuller used that head, the site of thought and pain, to cultivate her intellect and the intellect of her female colleagues, particularly those who associated with her in the conversations. These women joined Fuller in the temple of immortal intellect as brain sisters, transforming the nightmares which she suffered into dreams for a better world. A few, such as Sophia Ripley, created utopian communities like Brook Farm, but most of Fuller's colleagues looked to an even wider field of social development. Rather than retreating from society to improve it, women such as Caroline Healy Dow, Edna Dow Cheney, and Julia Ward Howe engaged in multidisciplinary cultural reform born of the labor pains that produced women in the 19th century. Their efforts before the Civil War on behalf of abolition and emancipation extended in the second half of the 19th century to female engagement in areas that touch on the pains of labor, economics, medicine, and motherhood. Caroline Healy Doll left Boston in 1842 to teach at Lydia English's female seminary in Georgetown. By 1844, she was married to Charles Dall and living in Baltimore, where he was a Unitarian minister working among the poor. A transcendentalist in her youth, she later founded the American Social Science Association, reflecting a turn of many of the conversationalists towards communitarianism, based on the principles of social science, seeking to address many inequities through social harmony, an homage to Fuller's hope for a ravishing harmony of the spheres. In 1859, Dahl published Woman's Right to Labor, a series of 3 lectures which asserted that women have a fundamental right to work and earn a living, and that denying them this right is a form of oppression. In discussing the obstacles that women face in the workplace, including discrimination and low wages, Dahl points to the very real pain that attends their efforts to labor. She contends that women have always worked, and while their work must be acknowledged and compensated, it is even more important that they be allowed to do the kind of philosophical work that men have protected for themselves. In Women's Right to Labor, she carves out a public sphere for women to establish women's claim to civil positions, women's right to an education, choice of vocation, and elective franchise as the only way to secure that vocation and the education on which it depends. For Alcott, work is her most robust treatment of female labor, anchored by the work experiences of Christy Devon as a servant, actor, governess, companion, and seamstress. Her search for a vocation becomes a spiritual quest in which she prizes her liberty over offers of love. She does finally marry, but grows close to her husband David only when she learns that he was shot in the war while seeking to rescue a runaway slave woman. Enlisted as a nurse, she meets David on his deathbed in the hospital. In his parting words to Christy, he pleads, "Don't mourn, dear heart, but work." After he passes, she goes to live with his mother-in-law, her mother-in-law, where she gives birth to her daughter, Ruth. She's joined by several other women to form a female household of mutual support. Here, Christy, her daughter, her mother-in-law, and her friends work to overcome the social miscarriage of female freedom. Work for women, as Louisa May Alcott well understood, was difficult to separate from the labor pains of poverty and domestic responsibility, including childbirth and maternal care. Perhaps for that reason, work is dedicated to Abba Alcott, whose life has been a long labor of love. Edna Dow Cheney was the youngest of the conversationalists. She transcribed many of their meetings and remained connected throughout her life to her transcendental roots, particularly through the Alcott family. Cheney was an editor and biographer of Alcott's work and helped to establish the School of Design for Women in Boston, where May Alcott trained before traveling to Europe to study. After the war, she pursued female suffrage and wrote biographies of women to place them in the canon. Later in her life, she spoke of Fuller's influence. She planted in my life the seeds of thought, principle, and purpose which have grown with my growth and strengthened with my strength, and I owe it to her to speak in her name and try to make her life again fruitful in others. This emphasis on vitality and health is manifest in her work to establish the New England Hospital for Women and Children. In Representative Women of New England, a wonderful feminist reply to Emerson's Representative Men, Julia Ward Howe reports that Cheney devoted herself to the work and became one of the most powerful advocates and supporters of this institution, which by its efficiency and conscientious work has not only educated women as physicians and nurses, but opened the way for the former to a professional equality with medical men. Founded in 1862, this institution sought to provide for women medical aid of competent physicians of their own sex, assist educated women in the practical study of medicine, and train nurses for the care of the sick. Alcott's treatment of female labor first appears in hospital sketches centered on her own work as a citizen nurse. In painting a portrait of Nurse Tribulation Periwinkle, Alcott both asserts the importance of work to female self-development and seeks to reclaim the field of medicine from men who are portrayed as inept at best and damaging at worst. When Periwinkle is promoted from day nurse to night nurse, she must learn to become more stoic in the face of her duties, which include close contact with many naked male bodies and when surrounded by their suffering, as during amputations. As president of the New England Hospital for Women and Children, Edna Dow Cheney worked closely with Dr. Marie Zarzewska, who founded the hospital and who responded to the work of Dow with a practical illustration of women's right to labor, an account of her own practice at the advent of female medicine in the United States. Cheney later wrote a biography of Dr. Susan Dimmock, who became the first female surgeon at the hospital in 1872, but died tragically in 1875 while crossing the Atlantic to Europe. Like Alcott, Cheney worked to reclaim medical practice from men who had botched the treatment of men during the Civil War and had also made specimens of women's bodies through early experiments and surgeries. Cheney's support of the Freedmen's Aid Society and her involvement in the establishment of the Massachusetts Infant Asylum, the New England Women's Club, a horticultural school for women, the Association for the Advancement of Women, and the Free Religious Association, which she considered a spiritual anti-slavery society, displayed her interest in helping people to thrive in body and soul. And finally, Julia Ward Howe was also involved in medical developments during the Civil War. As an officer in the Boston branch of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, she promoted hygienic conditions for soldiers and hospitals and helped train nurses like Louisa May Alcott and Clara Barton. Barton later founded the American Red Cross, an outgrowth of the commission. Howe was attuned to the suffering bodies in this conflict, building the her battle hymn of the Republic on the back of the anti-slavery standard, John Brown's body. After the war, she joined Lucy Stone in founding the American Women's Suffrage Association, which championed the 15th Amendment and established their organ or newspaper, the Woman's Journal, which she edited for 20 years. Julie engaged publicly years after composing two important works that focused on her private female labor pains, Passion Flowers and The Hermaphrodite, which exposed the difficulties in her own marriage and the quest for achievement irrespective of gender. Of her book of poetry, Passion Flowers, Longfellow declared, "Here is revolt enough." It was during her postpartum life that she could more productively resolve her own labor pains, transforming the trauma of women being denied political and economic roles into her ultimate vocation, the pursuit of peace through motherhood. In the same year that she joins the AWSA and founds the Woman's Journal, she issues an appeal to womanhood throughout the world, which begins, "Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of waters or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caress and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we've been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, "Disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession." The embodied language here is unmistakable, where she fuses the body of the dead, the body of Mother Earth, and the peaceful civic body, which she believes mothers can champion. By urging women to settle conflicts through diplomacy, she is promoting a form of motherhood that claims the civic body as her own. In 1871, she presided over the Women's International Peace Association, where she reiterated her plea for a great Congress of women of different nationalities to promote the great and general interests of peace. When she organized the Association for the Advancement of Women to improve women's education and entry into the professions in 1873, she was expanding her sphere of labor born of personal pain. As Howe, Cheney, and Dow discovered, women's health is not an isolated topic of concern, but an oppression to be relieved through their work of political, social, and literary activism, even if it means selling one's beauty in the form of hair, as does Jo in Alcott's Little Women. Alcott, too, wants to transform the headaches and labor pains of womanhood into something closer to Fuller's brain-filled temple of immortal intellect. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I'd like to begin by honoring Robert Hudspeth, who died this week, as the pioneering editor of Margaret Fuller's letters. He offered, among many things, the straightforward distinction between letters and journals. Simply, journals are kept, letters are sent to diverse others. He and I have always agreed on the importance of both as forms of communication and literature, and they form the personal writing of my title. In fact, I will add that letters and journals are forms of serial autobiography, among other things resonating with the physical and mental health of their authors. Where else might people write more openly about their illness and grief, as well as their cures and well-being? With the subjects of my talk, Margaret Fuller and Mary Moody Emerson, we find two women who, one of whom led an adult life of public influence, as you have just heard, whereas the other, Mary Moody Emerson, lived largely in private spaces. But both reflected on their respective journeys of illness and health and what are now rich archives of personal writing, extending throughout the half-century and more that also gave rise to the Transcendentalist movement. As a result, health concerns are positioned within and directly inform religious and philosophical reflections. One example, Margaret wrote to her friend Elizabeth Hoare in 1842 about the symptoms and treatment for her nervous headaches and related them to her spiritual history. Since her recent era of illumination, as she put it, when she had given herself up to the central power of the universe, she felt less pain than before, but only half the energy for work. For her, physical conditions and landscapes of the soul corresponded with each other. Indeed, a journal passage written shortly before the experience of illumination renders her headache in horrifyingly graphic terms. Here, Margaret recounts her dream of torment by a mysterious figure, the Egyptian, who invited a large butterfly to settle on her forehead and plunge his feet bristling with feelers deeper and deeper till my pain rose to agony. In the privacy of her journal, Fuller could record dream imagery quite different from her letters or later published writing. But her conclusion about the dream, that it is very illustrative of the influence of the body on the mind, anticipated a long-term conviction in all veins of her writing. For Margaret Fuller, the body, both its comfort and its suffering, cohabited with the mind rather than being transcended by it. A variant on this conviction also emerges in the personal writing of Mary Moody Emerson, the aunt and influential mentor of Ralph Waldo Emerson. In the spring of 1842, Mary, as well as Margaret, wrote to Elizabeth Hoare, who was her adopted niece within the Emerson family. She wrote to express sympathy after the death of Waldo and Lydia Emerson's 5-year-old son to scarlet fever. But like Margaret, she also gave an account of her own illness. Mary had what her doctors called a congestion of blood on the brain, causing confusion and debility in this woman in her late 60s, so that she expected someone to come in the evening to relieve this pressure by bleeding. In fact, the letter was completed during that later time. Since I began this page, she wrote, I have been prostrate on bed, and the phlebotomist has performed his lancing. Now, there is a direct report on a healthcare treatment. But Mary's letter concluded with sympathy for Waldo and Lydian, the grieving parents, with what she called love drawn deeper than the blood. She herself could be a phlebotomist of the soul. And this report on body and soul expands greatly if we turn from letter to journal to Mary's self-named almanac for 1842. Less than a week later, she recorded that she had lost sleep when the mere fear of apoplexy touched me, but I sat up in bed and I said, if by the agency of God, why, I embrace it. The will of God was manifest at once in her apoplexy and in her longer course of life, as Mary now recalled being shirked off, that is, sent away as a child from her family's clerical home in Concord. And she embraced the resulting journey since then as a wide high life, the will of God. Let me offer a few passages from each woman's writing as both autobiography and case history in 19th century medicine. I'll take them in historic sequence with Mary first. Mary never offered an extended narrative of her childhood, but pointed references to it abound in her writing. Her one-word account of it was trouble caused by death and illness. As we have already heard, she was shirked off from her birth home in the Concord manse. That is, she was sent at the age of 2 to be raised by her grandmother in Malden, about 15 miles from Concord, after her chaplain father died of camp fever in the Revolutionary Army. But what was never lost to memory, she claimed, was even more the experience of illness and death that Malden thrust upon her. At 5, Mary lost her grandmother in a smallpox epidemic. She recalled this loss as the beginning of trouble, for the sequel was a slavery of poverty and ignorance and long orphanship in her aunt's household, while with other adult relatives experiencing physical or mental illness that fell to Mary's care as she grew older, so that she claimed that she would rather die than be sticking on a bed and wished away. In the midst of trouble, however, Mary came of age, both literate and devout, so that the earliest surviving almanac charts her own journey of growth toward God in the thoughtful prose of a woman of 30. The word health permeates it. She has health, she wants it, she wants to keep it, and she sees it as a condition for spiritual growth. She claims that the body has a power of life which counteracts diseases and decay. Walking leaves her intoxicated with pleasure. Such journal passages set the stage for Mary's longer life record on her own and in her family as she took major responsibility for the health of others. In both her own generation and the one following, consumption, tuberculosis, was the force against which she battled. At one point, she even called herself Dr. Moody. First, her brother William, minister in Boston, and after his own death, his sons, including Ralph Waldo, suffered from it. The problem was spiritual as well as medical, as she urged the boys to safeguard their health, which she saw as the highest advantage to the soul when it fixes the attention on glory. Years later, after prolonged influence over Waldo's physical and spiritual formation, she was dismayed to learn that he was postponing divinity school because of failing eyesight, a clear symptom of consumption. Her urgent advice was that he must prepare sight or no sight to I'll say it again. Prepare sight or no sight to preach this divine medicine. Note that she was calling faith itself a medicine, so deeply intertwined for her were the medical and religious realms. Mary herself never became consumptive, for all her family contact with it. Her own particular ailment from middle age on was erysipelas, an affliction of her face and eyes that both caused pain and limited reading. This was surely the source of pain that brought on the phlebotomist lancing and bloodletting in 1842. When her doctor predicted a congestion of blood in the brain, Mary hoped for a quick release. But she did not die and reported to Elizabeth, "Never was prisoner more irked who in escaping his cell and leaping over hill and dale with sky and ocean in view was dragged back." She is rather famous for her death wish, but I would like to offer this one to you as equal to her in energy and really life affirmation. Furthermore, her journal and letters show her much later in life still engaged in the world around her. As she wrote, she sought both a vivid apprehension of God and a capacity to sympathize with human life. What a world of treasure it is. Surprisingly, Mary Moody Emerson and Margaret Fuller met each other only once, and their one encounter was a disaster, as they each reported to Elizabeth Orr. Mary complained that Margaret had treated her like any old bobbin woman. Margaret deplored what seemed Mary's hasty attempt at skimming from the deeps of theosophy. But Mary continued to think about Margaret, recalling that she had spoken of something evil in nature which had to be met and overcome. The two women's ability to cope with illness and respond to it in others stemmed directly from this metaphysic. Margaret's childhood also included grief and trouble, from her inborn curvature of the spine to, most of all, the education imposed on her by an ambitious father. Kept up late to fit his schedule, as she wrote, she underwent a premature development of the brain, which made me a youthful prodigy by day, and by night a victim of spectral illusions, nightmare, and somnambulism. The nightmares that her journal recorded in adulthood, she is saying, had actually been embedded in her physical self, in her brain from childhood. Margaret's domineering father suddenly died of Asiatic cholera when she was 25, leaving her as eldest child with family responsibility and depression of spirit. But about the same time, one of her most memorable journal passages recalls an earlier resistance to Father's church and discovery of a different holiness in the sun's rays. Intertwined with this memory, in fact, is a still older recollection of pausing as a child on the stairs of the family home and asking, "How is it that I seem to be Miss Margaret Fuller? What shall I do about it?" The doing is essential in this moment of recognition as much as the spiritual revelations that she also valued. Mary soon rose to new professional roles, from the conversations to editing the Transcendentalist Style magazine to composing the great lawsuit in its pages. She summed up the pain and determination of her life most tellingly, however, in a journal passage inscribed as she worked to revise the great lawsuit into her book, Woman in the 19th Century. Here's what she wrote. "I think the black jailer laughs now, hoping that while I want to show that woman can have the free, full action of intellect, he will prove in my own self that she has not physical force to bear it. Yet I will not be turned from the deeper convictions." Personifying a male jailer akin to the force indicted in her book, Margaret also captured a culminating moment in her decade of struggle for public vocation. Her most open confrontations with violence and disease, however, lay ahead of her in the European scene that grew out of her work as correspondent for the New York Tribune. In Rome, Margaret discovered that her characteristic headaches were part of a new health condition, pregnancy, which had resulted from her love affair with the young Italian Marquis Giovanni Osili. "I hope I will survive," she wrote to Giovanni shortly after the birth of their son Angelo, as I did other times in very difficult circumstances of my life. That hope amounts to a major autobiographical affirmation. Her vital energy had returned. Now her primary mission was to get her son inoculated against smallpox, which was running rampant in Italy. And back in Rome, she served as a medical practitioner far beyond what she had known before, accepting the mandate to direct one of Rome's military hospitals. With the defeat of the Roman Republic, Margaret and Giovanni prepared for a new life in America. But to her closest confidant, she admitted that a calm exterior masked trembling of the cord within. Margaret's letter from the voyage home, however, told of a disaster she had never dreamed of, disaster stemming directly from disease. It was their kindly ship's captain who fell ill of smallpox, contracted on a brief leave on shore, and he died within days. Helping to nurse him, Margaret wrote to friends in Europe of this ultimate encounter with disease, where the fair and expressive mold of man is thus lost in corruption before life has fled. Now her fear was for her family, noting that the baby is, of course, subject to injury. Curiously, she did not mention that he had been inoculated, but she concluded, "It is vain by prudence to seek to evade the stern assaults of destiny. I submit." Her energetic and fearless nature had met its match. That letter is the last surviving text of Margaret's writing career. Others told of its sequels, Nino's indeed contracting smallpox and surviving, but then after the first mate, now in charge of the ship, lost his bearings, the shipwreck outside New York Harbor that ended all of their lives. Mary Moody Emerson and Margaret Fuller both lived their lives before the discoveries that inaugurated modern medicine. It's important to say that their own era generated alternative cures of interest to them. Mary supported water cure treatment when it was established in her hometown in Maine, and Margaret claimed the vital energy that she found in mesmerism as an inner electricity essential to human life. Margaret's letters and journals, however, acknowledged natural power as a cause of disease as well as of potential cure. In her 1842 journal, she declared, "While the spirit ascends through every form of nature into man, there is no doubt that the serpent entered Eden." This depiction of the biblical Satan is surely akin to the Egyptian of her dream and the black jailer who laughed at her advocacy for women. Above all, to meet and overcome the serpent was in her mind a valuable realism, one she wished to practice. To Carolyn Sturgis, she wrote a decisive affirmation, "The mere idealist vexes me more than the mere realist, because he seems never to have lived. My foot is on the earth, and I wish to walk over it until my wings be grown." Mary Moody Emerson was ready for her wings, but also walked the earth as a realist. Drawn to Margaret through the belief in something evil in nature, she surely included the sufferings of illness and death within that force. In 1842, Mary wrote to Waldo on the death of his son to scarlet fever. "Grieve, I more than grieve," she wrote. "Could any ills of mine have saved him? I know too well the ways of loving boys, whose looks are of the soul and create new prophecies." Her nephew, Ralph Waldo Emerson, was not a mere idealist, but he knew and struggled to resist the illusions of idealism. Where do we find ourselves, he began his essay, experience. Ghost-like, we glide through nature. And among illustrations of this idea, he revealed that in the death of my son, I seem to have lost a beautiful estate. No more. I cannot get it nearer to me. It does not touch me. I grieve that grief can teach me nothing. In contrast, the two reflective minds of his Aunt Mary and colleague Margaret had directly internalized grieving, and it responded to the realities that they witnessed in the external world. The two women shared a more grounded belief than his. Their letters and journals present a different serial autobiography, a different transcendentalism from any that their famous relative and colleague could have articulated. Thank you.
I don't have a PowerPoint, but I have some images that I'm going to pass around because I've grown to fear PowerPoints. So thank you both for those wonderful papers, and I just can't thank Alice enough for organizing that conference in Paris, which was a real joy as well as very intellectually stimulating and generative. So Edith Emerson Forbes lived a privileged life that gave her access to cultural power and financial means. Born in November 1841, she was the daughter of Lydian Jackson, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. In 1865, she married William Hathaway Forbes, scion of a wealthy family, and moved to Milton, Massachusetts. Relentlessly optimistic, Edith's life was full and busy. She had 8 children, traveled widely, and was active in civic affairs and in shaping her father's legacy. She died in 1929, 2 days before her 88th birthday. And Edith and Phyllis have the same birthday. Different years. But her letters make it clear that she suffered from serious illness and physical pain throughout her long life. So today I will examine how her parents' differing ideas about illness manifested in the experiences and choices of this daughter of transcendentalism and matriarch of the Gilded Age. Edith's parents had strong opposing ideas about health and illness. Waldo, according to Robert Richardson, hated sickness, talk of sickness, and letters about sickness. Which was hard in the 19th century. Waldo wrote, for instance, for sickness is a cannibal which eats up all of the life and youth it can lay hold of and absorbs its own sons and daughters. And I would direct people to Stephen Rachman's presentation, Get Health, Emerson, Health and Cultural Pathologies, which is available on YouTube for more quotes. To Lydian, on the other hand, according to Edith's sister Ellen, the sick were rather enthroned. Ellen explained everything new, fine, handsome she inclined to put away for the sick. In Lydian's scathing transcendental Bible, she took aim at transcendentalist hypocrisy and solipsism, including attitudes towards illness. It concludes, if you will refuse all sympathy to the sorrowful, all pity and aid to the sick, all toleration to the infirm of character, if you have condemned the unintellectual and loathe such sinners as have discovered want of intellect by their sin, then you are a perfect specimen of humanity. While admiring and defending the ill, Lydian also took charge of her own health in ways that protected her from the worst abuses of 19th century women's health care. She began reading her uncle's medical books after an adolescent bout of scarlet fever, and that did sort of weaken her for the rest of her life. As a mother, she acquired her own copies of the medical books, along with a chest full of homeopathic remedies. Ellen reported that her mother was diligent in consulting the medical texts and selecting remedies for her own ailments and those of her large clientele of dependents and semi-dependents. Alice de Galzian has traced Margaret Fuller's influence on Caroline Healy Dahl's and Harriet Kenza Hunt's approaches to women's health, arguing that Dahl and Hunt's continuous emphasis on education, presented as the key to health reform, aligns with Fuller's call for self-culture as the foundation for women's empowerment. While Lydian's interest in medicine predated meeting Fuller, Galzian's argument leads me to speculate that Lydian's interactions with Fuller, as part of the conversations and at the Emerson home strengthened her determination to take charge of her health and underscores that she lived in a circle that supported this determination. And I think these other papers also underscore that. Certainly, it was a message she passed on to her daughters. Edith's first serious illness came in 1863 as she suffered from what Waldo described as a weak back and exhaustion. Ellen wrote to a cousin, "I have just returned from dragging my poor little sister out to walk. I wish she could be made to like it, but it really does seem to exhaust her very much." In December, Edith took a hydrotherapy cure with Dr. Charles Schleifendecker in New York City, staying with her Uncle William. Hydrotherapy was based on the idea that water was purifying, and patients consumed large amounts of cold water and took baths and wrapped themselves in wet sheets, as well as exercising and following a strict diet. Edith disliked the doctor and resented his food restrictions, particularly his objections to ice cream, which all of the Emersons loved. The rigid schedule, including 2 baths each day, followed by a mile walk and drinking a quart of very cold water, disrupted her sleep, leaving her more exhausted than ever. Her vivid letters detail her resentment of the doctor, her sense that he was out to get her, and the absurdity of his claims. After a month, she complained, "My back is weak again and often aches, and I am just getting well of a bad cough, which has bothered me for a week or two, and worried Haven still more." And Haven's her cousin, who is in medical school at the time. "Besides that, I am troubled as I was at Newport and have the same objection to morning, and my cheeks are hot and spotty, and not the cool red they were a month ago." A frustrated Waldo encouraged her to stay the course. "I am sorry that she has such a disgust for the doctor and his hospital, as it is likely to be in the way of such benefit as she might derive," he griped to his brother. But he did tell Edith that if, after serious contemplation, she felt the cure was worthless, she should come home. Lydian's advice was more proactive. She instructed that if the doctor refused to listen to Edith's concerns, he has very little information or judgment. Then she added, "I think you had best see if he will not let you use your own judgment in all things where you feel his rules are hurting you." While both parents did encourage their daughter to listen to her own instincts, giving her control over her body and health, Lydian is the one who told her to challenge the doctor and shape the cure into one that worked for her. For the rest of her life, Edith dealt with chronic pain and sought out solutions, including more water cures. She did this while raising 8 children and maintaining a dizzying social and travel schedule. While she did not leave the United States until she was 30, Edith was thereafter a frequent transatlantic traveler, going to Europe 15 times and voyaging twice to the Philippines, where her son was eventually Governor General of the Philippines, and that is another story. Maybe next year's theme. Her travel letters offer dramatic examples of how she navigated pain while staying committed to an active life. And she documented this in domestic letters as well, but I think the contrast between her pain and her ability to make these trips is really striking. So, for instance, in the Forbes 1888 European trip, Edith collapsed after arriving in England and then spent 2 weeks in Venice in bed. She sought out a cure by spending a month in Bath, and this was her first trip to Bath, where the city's thermal water had long attracted people looking for relief. She admired Dr. Cure, a pleasant young Scotchman who has plenty of cases like mine sent to him by doctors of women. Care found that her knee to be grating very harshly and pronounced her all out of condition and overweight. He prescribed a diet of dry toast, small portions of meat, green vegetable, and soulless water, which is the spring water aerated, and half an orange. In her biweekly baths, she sat for 12 minutes in 99-degree water. An attendant sprayed her back with a hose, which felt like a powerful, warm, and velvet soft hand, rubbing most deliciously. And then she was wrapped in scorching hot towels and sheets. Edith did dislike the diet, which caused such rapid weight gains that she felt dizzy. Care, however, treated her concerns with respect and upped her food allowance. When the Forbes moved to Edinburgh, she climbed the Arthur's Seat without losing my breath in the painful way that had plagued her. Underwriting Edith's travels and cures was, of course, the Forbes wealth. In 1900, Edith traveled throughout Europe for 5 months, and they traveled in grand style. But that July, despite shortness of breath, she rode a cogwheel trail part of the way up the Matterhorn with 2 of her children. She panted as she began the hike up the rest of the mountain, then saw that her suffering would so delay and distress the children that I must be subject to the ignominy of being carried up in a chair by two men who stood ready to hire themselves to tourists. And I've seen this in other 19th century letters. It was pretty common. Edith enjoyed the Paris exhibition, but note she used a wheelchair or rolling chair to get around one day. So if you're looking at the picture, there's an image of the rolling chairs that were kind of marketed as an attraction in the Paris exhibition. She also spent another month in Bath. Her ability to go to Bath and to hire a wheelchair in Paris and hire people to carry her up the Alps is indicative of how significant money was to Edith's ability to travel while disabled. But it also indicates how she sought adaptations and cures as a way of taking charge of her health, as her mother wanted her to do, while also refusing to let physical challenges limit her, as her father desired. Edith's experience in Bath made her part of what Karen Burrier has described as the thriving tourist industry that mobilized invalids to travel in search of health. But her commitment to movement through illness also hails back to her father. In 1870, during a difficult postpartum recovery following the birth of her third child in 5 years, she was confined to bed after developing a throat abscess. Waldo, as well as asking her to find a copyist for his letters from Thomas Carlyle, advised her not to give the least countenance to any hobgoblins of the sick sort, but to live out of doors and in the sea and the sailboat and the saddle and the wagon, and best of all in your shoes, as soon as they will obey you for a mile. He then admitted, since I expect so much of you, he refused to believe reports of her illness. And I both love his advice, and then you think about she's postpartum and has a serious infection before antibiotics, and she gets this letter saying, can you find a copyist, and by the way, go for a hike. So Edith was the only Emerson child who disliked the family's long Sunday walks, I think because she was always in pain. But she transformed his message about living outdoors to become a world traveler despite the obstacles. I think it's significant that her embrace of travel really begins in earnest the year after this letter, in 1871, when she accompanied her father, along with her husband, father-in-law, and several others on a trip to California. And she began this trip when she was 5 months pregnant, which was very unusual for a woman of her class to be traveling. And again, they're traveling in style. They're in the Pullman cars, and George Pullman is greeting them himself, but it's still quite an endeavor. Her first trip to Europe came the following year. The beginning of propulsive travel, of course, occurred in the shadow of her father's precipitous mental decline, which also may have spurred her desire to do as much as she could when she had the ability. As Ellen explained to Haven about the first European trip, we are so pleased they, Will and Edith, had the energy and wisdom to go while they are young. And they're traveling with 4 small children. I want to return to Lydian and Edith's evolving relationship with her. Lydian's attitudes about her health show her independence, but her refusal to listen to doctors infuriated her children, and includes their brother Edward, who becomes a doctor. I think there is space to see her choices as admirable self-culture and assertion of control over her body, a fundamental element of women's rights, but also acknowledge that her choices sometimes tip from self-culture to self-sabotage. And I think that may have some resonance with some of our conversations about health today. In August 1869, for instance, Edith wrote to Ellen of her mother, who was staying with her. Last night she was awake all night and without a watch. She spent her time in taking different kinds of medicine. No one knows how short the intervals were, and of course she got no good from any. And then she gravely informs me she will take no breakfast today, but a little weak tea and coffee, exclamation point. Edith was actually better at pushing back against this than Ellen, and Ellen admired Edith's fierce and faithful talons in the face of Lydian's behavior, which helped Lydian focus on the best choices for herself. But Edith's frustrations with her mother, along with her mother's advice about using her own judgment, helped her form better relationships with her own doctors. With the exception of Dr. Schleifendecker, Edith almost always reported positive interactions with her physicians, including Lucy Sewell, an early female doctor at the New England Women and Children's Hospital. And unfortunately, she says very little about the treatment she gets from her, but she always is happy to go see her. Ellen's letters are so full of wonderful details that I didn't immediately recognize the through line of illness and pain. It finally dawned on me that her descriptions of water on the knee and illnesses were not individual incidents, but the story of a person in chronic pain throughout much of her adult life. On top of this were her long postpartum recoveries. She was a very active pregnant person right up until the birth of her children, but then she would often be in bed for a couple months afterwards. And dramatic events such as her 1891 case of arsenic poisoning, which I'd be happy to talk about more in the conversation or over the weekend. I just want to conclude by saying I think it can be daunting, or at least it's daunting for me, to write and talk about 19th century women's health, where there are so many mysterious illnesses and bouts of exhaustion, and the challenge of parsing the relationship between physical health and mental health, and honoring women's reports on their bodies while also acknowledging the cultural and social factors that shaped how they experienced illness. Well, Edith's life was in many ways extraordinary. Her letters provide a window onto the way one woman, and of course a white woman of means, experienced illness and was able to work in concert with doctors and seek out assistance to live a life in motion despite pain. We can see how transcendentalist ideas, here directly communicated from two transcendentalist thinkers to their daughter, informed her choices, causing her to reject hobgoblins of the sick sort, while also seeking out the care she needed on her own terms.
What a joy to listen to three tremendous papers by three tremendous scholars. Thank you. I think for a gathering on living well, it was striking to notice throughout your papers how, we think about health as a physical state, we think about mental health, neurology, but this is really health as a form of intellectual engagement, health and spirituality and transcendentalist philosophy. So now we have, I think, a healthy number of minutes for a dynamic Q&A, so we'll just stop talking and we'll take questions.
Thank you. This is a question based on my ignorance, but as you're talking about faith and medicine and women, of course I turned to Christian Scientism and wondering what the connection might be there between women and health.
You ask a wonderful question, which I don't think any of the three of us can answer. You should work on that. But it's certainly true that Mary Baker Eddy took health as a spiritual condition in the same sense that these women did, so that it is part of a women's response to transcendentalism. You want to pick up on that? Do you have any thoughts?
I really don't have that much to add. I walk by the Mother Church on my way to my research at Mass Historical, and I was just struck the other day by all of the sort of large banners or flyers there indicating sort of again and again connections between spirituality and health. But in my work and the women I'm working on, I haven't really encountered a lot of conversation between those who in one way or another are influenced by or come out of transcendental thinking and those who find in Eddy's professions and work something to gravitate towards. I just haven't seen that connection, although it's surely part of this larger conversation about women's health and spirituality.
Some years ago, if I may jump in, some years ago there was an article that came out. It may have been in the, can you hear me?
1 second, yeah.
Yeah, some years ago there was an article that came out, I think it was in the New England Quarterly, the NEQ, about a peripheral relationship between the Alcotts and Mary Baker Eddy. So some work has been done on that, but as I say, the evidence was very, very slim, and the relationship was very, very peripheral. So it's my 2 cents.
any one of the panelists can answer this. In the medical knowledge, were the ladies influenced at all, or not at all, but more by like practicing physicians, or did they rely a lot on home remedies and things like that? What would be the ratio between that? Because I caught little bits and pieces in there that some of them did see physicians or, you know, people that were trained in the medical profession from that time, and then I also detected a little bit of home remedies. So what would be the ratio between that?
I could begin that since I have the earliest examples with Mary Moody Emerson, that she was consulting even in the very first decades of the 19th century. She was consulting licensed doctors, and the standard treatment was bleeding. Heroic medicine believed that medicine was a matter of balancing the four humors of the body, and that by removing an excess of blood, the woman, and I pause to say, I don't know to what extent it was practiced on men. Whether that this was it particular to women in their hormonal circumstance that it was believed that releasing blood might help them. There is no evidence with Mary Moody Emerson or Margaret Fuller that it ever did. And yet, Margaret Fuller, on the eve of her departure from Italy in 1850, is still being bled.
Well, I mean, I think with, if we're talking about Lydia Emerson, she does consult with doctors throughout her life, but she is also reading the medical texts herself, and the advice that she doesn't like from doctors, she feels free to reject. And then she does have this sort of chest of homeopathic remedies, but there's also a letter from her brother-in-law who's like, I know you don't like all this like tomfoolery, so I think she'll sort of, she just does what she wants, and I think she finds the evidence to do what she wants. But if she feels like this treatment isn't working, she's not going to use it. Edith really does believe in medicine, and she's a few generations later. But she is also, I think with her, she does love water cures as well. She goes to Bath all the time, but she also goes to water cures around the United States. And she also always will seek if she doesn't feel like a treatment is working with a doctor, she's happy to get a different doctor. Like she's always, and she has the money to go like, okay, when her husband it turns out he's dying, but like they go to Johns Hopkins and get like the founder of Johns Hopkins to treat him, so in that way, she's really engaged with sort of, standard medicine, but also because of her brother, and her brother had trained in Europe, so he often has some of the newest ideas. Like he's really, when he comes back from Europe, he's like really trying to get the hospitals in Massachusetts to use thermometers. So I think she often turns to him, and I think until he stops practicing after his father dies, she's bringing in some of the newest ideas. So it's standard medicine, but looking for what the newest thing in that is.
I'll just add a few thoughts. I didn't say much about physical medicine in my paper, but I'm reminded almost immediately of the adage about the First World War, that it was especially cruel because there were modern ways to destroy life, but not yet modern ways to save life. And I think that it's worth bearing in mind that in the 19th century, medicine is still developing. And we might even, back to the earlier question about Mary Baker Eddy, we might see the Christian Science movement, and again, disclaimer, I'm no authority on the practice or its position on various health remedies, but my light understanding is that there is a kind of a skewing of medicine and a belief that these things can be resolved through through faith, or a kind of distrust of emergent modern medical practice. And so maybe in some ways it's very much an expression of its moment, where medicine is not yet entirely reliable in all regards. One of Julie Ward's Howe's sons becomes a doctor. I'm trying to think of other sort of immediate connections that I can think of, but it just reminds me sort of how avant-garde Edna Dow Cheney is in helping to found the New England Hospital for Women and Children. I mean, this is really absolutely contemporaneous with the Blackwell sisters, and you may have read that recent dual biography of them, and so they're responding to the ad hoc ways in which women's bodies are being sliced and sewn up and treated and mistreated, and trying to get sort of feminine-centric medical practice applied to women's bodies and women's lives during this time. But I think it's still, throughout this entire century, still very much in formation, right? We don't yet have known remedies, known medicines, and cures for all of the diseases as we understand them now.
Could I add a quick P.S.? And that is that medicine was not one thing, of course, through the 19th century, and there are large-scale alternatives rising across the nation, so that two that I have merely mentioned are mesmerism and water cure, and they were both very important to women. Whether that you would call that a home remedy or a medical practice depends on your own evaluation of them. But please come to the Fuller session on Friday to hear much more about both of them.
Thank you so much. This is a spectacular presentation. I was really struck in hearing that Lydian took such efforts to with her daughters to make them proactive about their health, to get them to question the doctors and stand up for themselves. And it struck me that that seems like it's so much in common with Margaret Fuller. And always before, I'd kind of pictured that household of Emerson passing notes to Margaret Fuller and Lydian being aware and sort of annoyed. But here's this great common ground that they have. I was wondering if anybody could talk more about that. Did they get a sense of the things that they had in common?
I agree that the tension is much more on the record. We don't know what conversations they had after hours, or indeed what things Lydian may have picked up from Margaret without acknowledging the source.
Would she have ever gone to the conversations?
Was she what?
Would she have gone to Margaret's conversations?
Yes.
So maybe she did.
Yes, that's true. And that's after the first encounters between the two of them in the Emerson house in the 1830s.
I've been reading a new project, Sarah Freeman Clarke's letters, and it's been very interesting for me to read about sort of Lydian and Ralph Waldo Emerson as younger people. It's sort of like learning about your parents' like college years, and you see Sarah Freeman Clarke called Lydian a soaring transcendentalist. So you see the way when she like comes into that circle, she really is seen as a thinker in a way that I think has been sort of forgotten a little bit, and partly because of the way Lydian's relationship to illness has been written. So I also really encourage anyone who hasn't to read Ellen Emerson's biography of her mother, which is, you can buy it at the Emerson House. I know they actually got the copyright and have reprinted it, because it's really Edith, Ellen's, I think, thinking of her mother after her mother's died. And she was a frustrating mother, I think, in some ways. And they did have to take care of her a lot. But you can see her in that book rethinking her mother and realizing that her mother was also a real transcendentalist thinker and she basically is like, I want to make sure she gets this credit, which I don't think she still has, but the documentation has been done by Ellen.
So to be respectful of time, I'm told this was the last question, so please join me in one last round of applause for this amazing panel.